Welcome back to the Our View podcast. On today's show, I welcome my guest, Chris Slavin. Join us as we discuss her service dog, Earle, her two spinal cord injuries, and the difference between service dogs and emotional support animals.
Yeah.
Okay. And we are recording. So, thank you again for such a quick response to my message I sent you over the weekend. I sent you a message on Saturday, and you sent it back right away. And even though with the time difference of me being in New Jersey and you're in Ireland, I won't take up too much of your time. I know there's a slight time difference here, but
You're
so
fine. I'm good. My Noah doesn't get home for a while, so we're good.
oh, okay.
So I can start off if you want.
Yes.
Okay. 1 second again. Earl Jump, coming up, please. So my name is Chris Slavin, and I'm from Danvers, Massachusetts, and I spend about half my time in Ireland. Um, and I'm a service dog handler. I have my own service dog named Earle. Um, and I've had Earle now for about 4 years. And I have I guess my disability history is a little unique, maybe. I was born with a skeletal dysplasia. It was just a genetic disorder that affected the way that my bones were formed. Um, and it didn't bother me too much as a child. I had some medical issues from it, and I was kind of in the hospital with kind of eye and kidney issues and some orthopedic issues. But I was always an athlete, and I was a competitive adaptive snowboarder, and in 2007 I had a spinal cord injury, um, and so that was a T7 incomplete injury, and then from there I became a wheelchair user,
Oh,
um, and so then I started pursuing para skiing. So I was a monoskier. I was training for the 2014 um, Paralympics, and then I actually was competing on the 7-year anniversary of my first spinal cord injury, and I had a second spinal cord injury, which was a C6, C7 incomplete spinal cord injury, um,
wow.
which resulted in me retiring from ski racing. So
Wow. So you said it
yeah,
was on the seventh anniversary of your first injury?
it was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
and the irony of it, I think, is that was my first injury was competing at snowboard nationals through USASA, and
Hmm.
then my second injury was at US Paralympic nationals as a mono skier. So yep, 7-year
Wow.
anniversary.
Oh, wow. That's, yeah, the irony of you, like you said. Oh my goodness. That's so you were a wheelchair user before you got Earl the service dog, right? Correct?
I was a wheelchair user for probably about 8 years prior to getting Earl.
Hmm.
But my injury, I was incomplete. So I had a T7 incomplete injury, and I was traveling a lot for ski racing. I was training. I lived half time in Aspen, Colorado, half time outside of Boston. And the lifestyle really wasn't conducive to having a service dog, and my needs were not maybe as significant at that time to have a
Hmm.
service dog. It actually probably would have taken away some of my freedom, having to be responsible for a service dog while trying to train. Um, and it wasn't until my second injury, where initially after my injury for probably about 3 years, I had a very significant number of surgeries. I had lost a lot of my tricep function and my hand function. I was in a great deal of pain kind of all the time. I'd gotten very, very weak. And it was at that point that I realized when I couldn't even get like propel my wheelchair up a curb cut. I just didn't have that strength. And I had lost a great deal of my independence. I knew at that point that I wasn't going to be going back to ski racing, that my life was, I thought that my life was going to be really more, um, based in my home community. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so at that point, I decided to apply for a service dog, kind
Okay.
of to help me with my basic, the basic things I needed, day to day. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
How long is the process of from when you applied to get a service dog to when you actually received Earl?
So it really varies. There's a couple of routes that one can go. And there's a lot of organizations that are out there that train service dogs and place service dogs. Some you pay for, some there are no fees for. Some have really long waiting lists. Those tend to be the organizations that have no fee attached. Um, and then there's some that have shorter, shorter kind of waiting lists. So I applied, I think from the time I applied, um, to the time Earle and I actually went to school was maybe probably a year and a half, which is
Okay.
actually very short.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it was actually from the time that I applied to the time that I was notified was 15 months. Excuse me,
Okay.
yeah, it was about 15 months, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just over the weekend I was watching on Netflix. They have a new documentary called Pick of the Litter
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
yeah, I just watched that and just to see the training that they go through from when they're, very small puppies and the people that they are partnered with for training and then they have to pass certain one of the tests was like a walking test, like out in the street without a curb, without a sidewalk.
Hmm.
And, the way they have to guide the person around, these were seeing eye dogs, and the way they had to guide the person around cars and other obstacles that might be in the street. Uh, so it was really interesting to see that whole year. That was a year long process of training that these seeing eye dogs had to go through to in order to pass, and
Yeah.
some of them didn't pass, and some of them went to breeding, and some of them they called it career changes. So for those that
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
pass the the
Yeah.
test, so that
We
was I love that one.
Earl's so Earl's organization, or the school that Earl came from, what he does, or the way that they do it is, their puppies are actually raised in prison. So the puppies are born, and then they spend about 12 weeks in the puppy center, with their mother.
Mhm,
You know, then they're weaned, and then they spend time together, and they get the very early introduction to kind of like sounds and smells and textures of the world, and that kind of helps to lay the foundation for a really good service dog in the future. And then when they're about 12 weeks old, they actually head off to one of 9 prisons in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and
right.
they're kept, they're assigned to an inmate, and that inmate will have that dog from the time that they're 12 weeks old until the time that they are placed back at the school for their very final training. So that might be up to 18 months. And so yeah, so Monday through Friday the dogs live in prison, and they are really well loved and very, very well trained.
Mhm.
And then on the weekends, on Fridays, they have a weekend puppy raiser that will come and pick them up on Friday, and
Oh.
then they will keep them for the weekend. And that's where they learned, that's where they learn their public access skills. So things like, you're not going to find an elevator or necessarily, or they go to the museums, or they learn how to ride the train,
Oh,
or the
right.
buses, and those kind of things, and living in a very home like environment. So
Mhm,
um, it creates some really, I mean, I think it creates really fabulous dogs, and the dogs are really confident, and um, so they have a great bond. They're with their inmate handler 24 hours a day. So wherever that inmate goes, the dog goes. So if the inmate goes to a parole hearing, or if the inmate goes to court, or the inmate goes to the infirmary, that dog is with the inmate 100% of the time. So
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, I in reading more of your story with Earl, I saw that he was raised in a prison in Rhode Island, correct?
He was in Cranston, Rhode Island at JJ Moran prison. Yeah.
Yeah, Rhode Island's one of
Um,
my favorite places to visit. I love it there. I haven't been in a few years, and of course, I was hoping to get there this summer, and then our pandemic happened, so putting it on hold until
yeah,
next year or so. Yeah, and
yeah,
I think growing up, I guess it just seemed so far away, and then from New Jersey, it's only like a 5 hour car ride, maybe. Um,
yeah.
to get there. And then once I figured that out, I was like, oh, I'm going there all the time. It has the best, the best seafood and just it's just a beautiful place to visit. And actually went to Boston once when I went there to Rhode Island to visit one of my friends. We went to a Red Sox game once. Um,
I do enjoy a good Red Sox games. They're the
yes,
most expensive tickets in the Major
in
League
baseball.
Baseball,
Yeah.
because we have the smallest, we have the smallest and the oldest, um Fenway
Field.
Park is, yeah, thank you for me,
Hmm.
field, thank you, that's what I'm looking for. We have the smallest and the oldest fields, so they have to jack the prices up a little bit higher to make enough. Well, I mean, we won't get into politics of that, but like to make enough money. So it's like I don't go to a ball game very often. I think my last ball game was a couple of years ago. I actually brought Earl. And they have some pretty good adaptive seating, so handicapped accessible seating. So if you get a
They
chance to go again,
do.
yeah.
Yes, they do have very accessible seating, and the employees that work there were I found them to be very helpful with assisting me. I use crutches and I wear braces, but I do use my wheelchair when I'm out traveling most of the time. And they were very accommodating, very knowledgeable of where to go and what to do, and here's where the restrooms are and things like that. So I did find that very
That's
helpful.
It's funny that you say that, because I've only been to one game, I think, since I've been a wheelchair user. One game, yeah, I think it was one game at Fenway since I was a wheelchair user. Um, and I was really impressed by how knowledgeable and accommodating their staff were. So basically, like, once you're in the stadium, you're not supposed to leave. But I have a service dog, and it was a really, really super hot day, and it's, I mean, baseball, it's a long game.
Right.
And so, yeah, they were great. Like, they let us, I just went to out on the, I needed to leave so he could go to the bathroom, and I just asked, and like the gentleman was like, oh yeah, of course, like, that's fine. And I went out, and he did what he needed to do, and I came back in, and they just escorted me through the crowds back up to my seat. And no, it's nice. It's nice when things like that happen.
Yes,
So
because they don't always happen that way, that
right,
easily.
because getting to Fenway is a great big pain in the butt, and then like getting from parking like onto like the sidewalks that you can't get onto, or that are too narrow because they're filled with, you know, um, you know, like
Food
sidewalk
carts and
furniture.
everything, and yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's a pain. But it was nice that once I got into the stadium, people were really accommodating. So
Yes, and
yeah.
and like I said, I always pay attention to those kinds of things because they don't always happen as
Yeah.
smoothly. Some people don't
You
know
know,
where to find things and where to send you, and so when it does work well, I
yeah, you end
always
up
like
doing
to
circles.
Right.
Yeah, you
When
end
it
up
does work well, I always
at a
like to
broken
acknowledge it.
elevator. Yeah, no, I was really impressed with Fenway. If they could do something about their ticket prices, I'd be even happier. But we're just talking about like negotiating these difficult like situations, and as wheelchair users. I also use forearm crutches,
Mhm.
primarily, actually, when I'm in Ireland, I actually use them more often than when I'm at home, because things are it's much older country here, much smaller country, much more difficult to negotiate as a wheelchair user. And so I find that I'm almost, if I want to be able to live my life effectively, I almost have to be on my forearm crutches more. I don't know about you, but for me, it's a little bit of a trade off. I get a lot of fatigue, I'm not as independent on my forearm crutches as I am in my
Yes.
wheelchair. Like I
Mhm.
can't grocery shop
Right.
with my
Because
forearm
you
crutches
can't carry
at all.
anything, and yeah.
Yeah, like I can't. I'm kind of like, oh, do I want to reach things today, or do I actually want to be able to get them out of the store?
Right.
So, you know, but but yeah, like what I found with having a service dog is, people understand that having a service dog, that your service dog is going to perform various tasks for you, and it's going to make your life easier. So the things that Earl does to make my life easier, is I drop things all the time. I have an incomplete C6, C7 injury, so it affects my hands a little bit. And so I drop my phone, I drop my keys, and he will just automatically pick those up and give them to me. So he does I would say his most common tasks that he performs for me is picking things up. People always want to know like what he does for
Yeah.
me. Um, but the things that you don't realize a dog is going to do for you, are things like, people are a lot more helpful because you have a dog. Because they may not want to be nice to people, but you've got to be a real jerk if you're not going to be good when you see a dog. Um, and so, you know, there's also um, kind of a balance between, as a wheelchair user, I sometimes find myself a bit of a spectacle when I go places,
Yeah.
because you tend to be an anomaly. People, um, I don't know, like I find people either like they see you and then they're like afraid to like acknowledge you because they are just socially awkward, and
Mhm.
so then they ignore you. um or then there's the people that are exceptionally over the top, like helpful, and then there's,
Yes.
your average person that's just averagely good. But I find like with Earl, people tend to be nicer, they tend to notice me um more, and be willing to see I don't need their help as much because I've got my dog. But I feel like we can have a conversation and open up the conversation a little bit better, because we're going to end up talking about dogs instead of like, those, why do you have those kind of wheels in your wheelchair? That kind of thing. You
Right.
tend to have like a more human conversation,
Yeah.
and
Because
not
of the dog opening up that
yeah,
door
as
and
opposed to
breaking
like
that barrier.
a disabled conversation where people are just kind of like, what happened to you? you know
Yes.
Um, but,
Yeah,
the
that's so
good,
true.
right? Like I've had some crazy conversations on buses, like in Aspen. Like some of the things people have asked me in public, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like really? Um, but going to Fenway, back to on topic. Sorry, I'm Irish. I tell a long story.
No.
Um, they, they there's we're like, to make a long story long. I mean, to make a short story long. Um, I find that when I'm traveling through the cities, or traveling on public transportation, it's so much easier with Earl, because you need to take up a little bit of extra space because now you're a wheelchair plus a service dog, and
Right.
people, Labrador, they do tend to soften people's hearts, and he also kind of breaks trail for me a little bit, and then people inform everybody around them that there's a dog, like and so while for some people that's not ideal, like people who are shy, or people who really don't want to be noticed, like a service dog probably isn't going to be for you,
Right.
because but you're trading off being a spectacle, right? Because it's kind of, do I want to be a spectacle because I'm a wheelchair user and everybody's staring at me because I'm a wheelchair user? Or do I want people who are going to stare at me, or not stare at me, but stare at my dog? And
Mhm.
people will come up to you and they will ask you questions, but they're no longer asking like, can you have sex? Or like, how do you go to the bathroom?
Right.
Now they want to know like how old your dog is, and
Yeah,
what
how
he
long
does
have
for
you
you.
had your dog and what does he do and all that? Yeah.
Yeah, which is much more pleasant on a public bus to
Yes.
than being like, "What's wrong with you?" Um, so yeah, but that's some of the things that you don't expect you're gonna get when you get a service dog.
Yeah, and
and
it's
some of the best
interesting.
aspects of it.
It's interesting, like you just said, that the dog brings a more human conversation to the to the room. Like
Yeah.
it just, yeah, it does. It really, uh, there's something about dogs that it does. It softens people, and like you said, you may not a person may not approach you just being a wheelchair user or a person with a disability, but if they
Mhm.
have the service dog, it makes it more. I guess it makes people more comfortable to approach you. Uh,
Yep.
to ask, like you said, to ask if you need help or with something like that, because I think they see the service dog, so they realize that something must be there, a need must be there, that the dog is providing
Yeah.
for the person, which is really, really interesting
I I
though.
I think I think another thing that, like as we're talking, I mean, I do think about this occasionally, but as we're talking, it's kind of going through my mind at the moment is, um, you know, I used to do a lot of disability awareness speaking in schools.
Mhm.
And so much of that talking or speaking tends to be around like what makes me different than, you know, a person that isn't in a wheelchair or doesn't have a disability. And when I first started doing my speaking, like I found that that was very much like a common theme. And then I started talking to schools, like administrators prior to coming to speak, and saying, like, really, what you really want kids to see is not is the commonalities,
Right.
because that's where human relationships are formed. And I think that that's one thing that kind of having a dog brings is people have an instant visual kind of symbol that, oh, we have something in common.
Well, that
Like so
that
many people.
reminds me of my message to you. One of the first thing I mentioned was, I found Earl the service dog, and I grew up with a yellow lab too. you
Right,
know, so
exactly.
it does it.
Yeah,
It brings, I saw his picture and I was like, hey, like he looked a lot like my dog when I, when I was younger. So it does,
right.
and back to what you said about the awareness, speaking in schools, you want the students and everybody to recognize the differences, but to bring it back to, hey, do you like doing this? I like doing this too. And
Exactly.
that's one of my icebreakers I use in the classroom. Depending on what grade. So I speak to a specific sixth grade in a school district every year. So for sixth graders, I said, and it's in October, so it's like right after summer, school's just really, getting back into the swing of things. And I say, how many of you went to an amusement park this summer? How many of you went swimming this summer? And how many of you went to the beach this summer? And they're getting excited and they're, yeah, yeah, and they're raising their hands. And I said, oh, I did all those things too. And they're like, well, wait, you're in a wheelchair. How did you get to, how did you get on the beach, or how do you swim? And so then
Yep.
that starts that
Yeah.
conversation of, yeah, my legs don't work that well, but my arms work very well. So I don't swim
Right.
fast. I don't swim
Yeah.
fast, but I swim. I can keep myself above water. So, and
Yep.
it brings the conversation into the beach. They're
Hmm.
just really starting to put more of the accessible tiles down on the beaches here in New Jersey, so I can actually get my chair onto a beach and not on the boardwalk, or on, not stay on the sidewalk and look at the ocean. I can actually get close to it. And even some towns here have big, it's like they're made of PVC piping, and they have
Yep.
huge wheels, so you can
Hmm.
actually get down to the water. So so opening that conversation, because they're in sixth grade now, but they might be planning to go into some type of engineering or something, and they may be able to remember that conversation they had with me in sixth grade and create a water wheelchair for the beach or something. So it's just
Yeah.
like you said, bringing that commonality to, hey, you like doing this, I like doing this too. I have to do it
Right.
differently, and
Exactly.
and sometimes it's a little more difficult for me to do it. But with your brilliant mind, like I said, maybe when you get older, you might want to create something that makes it easier for people in wheelchairs to swim, or
Yeah.
wheelchair users to swim, or people with other disabilities to do things. So it's that's very
One of.
important.
Oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say it's just very
Yeah.
important to do that.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that I had, in September. So I run a nonprofit called Project Possible, and we bring outdoor adaptive recreation to people with disabilities here in Ireland. It's really not a common thing here. It's very difficult as a wheelchair user to have access to the outdoors here.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's what we do. But I was doing a fundraiser, and I hand cycled 2,000 miles around the perimeter of Ireland in September, and I stopped at schools along the way, and it was so amazing. Like cycling is really becoming really big in Ireland, and that again, like that commonality was, I found that kids were really interested in like my bike and how I cycled, and like the kids that do like actually not just go on their bikes, but the kids that actually cycle. And I'm talking like elementary school kids, like primary school kids, who it's just getting really big, triathlons as well. And so like we found ourselves like talking about like bike components, and I have mountain bike tires on my wheelchair, and like mountain biking, and hey, aren't those Michelin whatevers, like having these conversations. And so then they start to realize, I think, that what the possibilities are, that like life doesn't stop or not begin because you have a disability. And I think that that is hugely important, because as is a common phrase, and as I use often, is we're all just temporarily able, because like you don't know when disability will happen, whether that be
Right.
temporary or permanent disability. And I think it's important for people to be out there, and to be visible, and to you know there was a time when in the United States, there's more recently a time in Ireland where people with disabilities, because things were so inaccessible, they didn't get out.
Right.
And then you have people saying things like um oh, well, we don't have any disabled people in our village, so we don't need to have curb cuts.
Hmm.
And it's like, well, you do, but it's just that people can't get into the center of the village, so
So they stay in.
they stay in.
Yeah.
So somebody else shops for them. Um,
Right.
and just that kind of thing. So
Well, and it happens
yeah,
to
I
me
think
all the time.
disability is good.
I love going to concerts, and I can't tell you how many times people, first of all, they have the accessible seating at the concerts, or as we mentioned before, the sporting events at baseball stadiums,
Yeah,
football stadiums. I am more often than not, I am mostly the only person that is a wheelchair user in these accessible seating sections.
yeah,
And the employees that work there, they say things like, "Oh, it's good to see you out."
yeah,
And every now and then I have a nice reply of, "Yes, my family lets me out on the third Sunday of every month." Like I don't
yeah,
know how to respond to those kinds of things, but it's because, as you said, things weren't always easily accessible. They still aren't completely accessible. So
mhm,
a lot of
yeah.
times people just stay in, unfortunately. So it's
How,
really
how do
sad
you
sometimes.
how do you feel about doing simple everyday tasks and having people think that you're heroic for doing them? Do you experience that? um like kind of like the going grocery shopping, like like good for you, or people who are like, well, I had my knee replaced, and like
Yeah. I
I'm
do
like,
get it. I get it a lot from people, and I try to understand what they mean, but then at the same
yeah,
time, it's like, well, I have to eat just like you do too, so
that's
I have to
that's what
go
I
to
say.
the
I
grocery
usually say something,
store.
oh, well, like negotiating the lack of public transportation and inaccessibility of the sidewalks is far preferable than starving to death in my bedroom.
Right. Right. Like I have to eat at some point, and
you know
um yeah, I do. It's like I understand what they mean, but at the same time and I think people, it goes back to what we were saying, it's hard to approach people with disabilities sometimes.
yeah,
And so people are
yeah,
just looking for something to say to like break the ice,
yeah,
and
yeah,
they think that's it, and it's like, well, maybe you could have just said hi, or have a good
yeah,
day, or
yeah,
something like that. May
yeah.
I help you with
Well,
that? Or
and they share it,
right.
yeah, yeah.
But
I mean,
it is, it's
I I try to approach it kind of, if they look like they can handle humor, we do a little bit of humor. But I think, like you said, people in general, I think, have the best of intentions.
Right.
Even like really uncomfortable questions that you get on a bus, while they're intrusive and inappropriate, in general, people are doing the best they can with whatever poor skills that they have at making a connection.
Yes.
Sometimes it's just curiosity that is rude, but at the same time, I try to give the benefit of the doubt.
Hmm.
Um, I think that the other thing is, people offering help. I feel kind of the same way about, is that sometimes people offer help when it's actually more inconvenient for me to accept that help, because I have a way of doing things. And um, like holding doors is a big one for me. Like
Right.
I actually use like the act of opening the door to propel me through the door. And so then you have
Yes.
people that like open the door and then they stand on the inside. And so then there's
Yeah.
not enough room for me to get through without wheeling over their feet. And I have a service dog.
Right.
So they're doing the best they can, but I almost never say no, because I feel like um, there's going to be somebody that does need that help.
Yeah.
And I think that what happens is that people will, like, if you're like, no, I'm good. I mean, I think it's okay to say no, I'm good, but if they're very insistent, like, I almost feel like I know people that are actually kind of rude to people, or they're insulted when people ask if they need help.
Right.
And I just feel like, don't want to be mean, because then they'll be ashamed and then be embarrassed. And then when somebody really does need help, they'll
And
be afraid to offer it,
yes,
you know?
exactly. Yeah, I do. I always try, if I do need help. It happened, I went to the store yesterday, 2 days ago. All my days are still running together. But
Yeah.
I went I went to the store 2 days ago, and I was and we have to wear masks here when we go out. So
Yep.
I came out of the store and I had 2 bags. So I had the 2 bags on my lap, and I got out of the store and I was away from the door, so I took my mask off because as unsanitary as it might be, I put the bag in my mouth so I can wheel my wheelchair
Well,
to
cause
get
yeah, because
to my
otherwise it
car.
falls off your lap, of
Right,
course.
because
Why
that's
wouldn't
what I
you?
have
Of
to
course.
do.
That's what you do. That's,
So I was wheeling to my car, and there was a person parked before in the spot before I got to my car in another handicap spot. And she got out of her car and she says, "Oh my goodness, can I please help you?" And I said, "No." I said, "Thank you so much." I said, "But I'm good." And and by that time I already had my door open, had the bags in the car, and I was taking my chair apart to put it in my trunk. And she says, "Oh my goodness." She said, "I'm so sorry.
yeah.
I was waiting for my dad to come out, and I didn't see you until now." And I said, "Oh no, it's fine. I appreciate it. Thank you." She said, "If my dad comes out and sees me sitting here while you're doing that, he would be so upset with me." And "It's okay.
Hey,
I
you're doing all
appreciate it." Yeah. And she
I
said, "Oh,
think
wow." She said, "Well, you're already done." I said, "Yeah."
my favorite story, or my favorite experience with people helping, is I was at the grocery store and I was getting my wheelchair out of the car, and this elderly woman that seriously had to be 90 with her walker came up to me. She was in a handicap parking spot next to me, and she said, can I help you, like, get my wheelchair out and put it together? And I'm like, oh no, like, I'm fine, like, I do it all the time, don't worry. And she was like very insistent and wouldn't stop. And so I literally did I took my wheel out and I was like, "Oh, can you just hold this wheel up for me?" Like, I had to find
Mhm.
something for her to do, because it was just like, "Can I wheel can I lean this wheel against your walker?" you know? And so, like, so I put my wheelchair together, hop out of my car, I go in, and she said, "What would you have done if I hadn't come along?" And I'm thinking, do you think I drive to the grocery store and sit in the handicap parking spot with my door open until somebody comes and randomly helps me get out of my car? But just, it was just so funny, but so like, it was so sweet at the same time. The
Right.
same time,
Yeah.
it's like one of my favorite like helping memories. Like,
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
I lean this wheel? You know, let me just lean,
Yeah.
lean this wheel against your walker. Thanks.
Yeah, I had an elderly woman that said that she would take my basket and put it in her cart, and she would like follow me around so that I could shop freely. And I was like, no, I said, I'm pretty much done though. And she, are you sure? She said, because I don't mind, it gets me out, shopping gets me out of the house. And I have all the time today. I said, oh, okay. I said, well, maybe next time. I said, I'll take you up on it next time if I see you here again.
I think, do you ever look at it as, I try to kind of look at, like, I'm a super independent person and I don't like help, especially help that I don't need. Um, but when I start to flip it in my mind and start to realize that sometimes allowing people to help is actually giving them a gift, and you don't have to do it all the time, but sometimes, like, if you feel like you're a little bit forced into it, I think the way that I kind of ease my and lower my blood pressure about it a little bit is just being like, this is a gift for them because they're going to leave and they're going to feel good about themselves and they want to help, just like children, like just like small
Yes.
children when you're in the kitchen and you're baking a cake, and they're going to make a mess out of it, but they
Right.
really want to help. Like, you have to
Yeah.
bite the bullet sometimes and be like, yep, you can break the eggs. you know
Yeah.
um
I was going to
you know
say that kids, when children ask to help, I usually try to figure out something. And like you said, with the elderly woman in the parking lot, I'm like, yeah,
yeah,
you can hold this wheel. Like it's really, that would really help me out a lot until I get the other parts apart. And because my wheelchair, the wheels snap off and the back folds down, and I pop it
yeah,
in my hatchback. But it's like, yeah, if you want to hold these two wheels, and it really makes them feel a part of something.
mhm,
And like you said, giving them a gift of, hey, I helped this person. And
yeah.
so
I
I
had
I agree with that for sure.
I had a woman at a grocery store. I was trying to get ice cream, and it was up high, and there was a woman, and I said, "Oh, excuse me, would you mind, reaching that for me?" And she started, like, literally squealing and kind of like bouncing up and down. And I'm like, oh my God, it's one of those people. Like, and so, and then all of a sudden she reaches and gives it to me, and all of a sudden she stops, like, she's a little stuck, and she's like, I'm so sorry, but you don't understand. I'm really excited. Not it, it's because I'm only 4'8" and nobody ever asks me to reach anything. But I'm in a wheelchair, so I didn't realize how short she was because I'm really short.
Right.
And she was just like, I'm not like she's like, I'm so excited that somebody has asked me to ask me to reach something. I'm only 4'8". I'm like, that's so accomplished. I was just like, well, you're taller than I
Right.
am. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
is. It's really
So, yeah.
I do find I understand the frustration of it sometimes when
Mhm.
because like you said, I'm also very independent, and I live on my own, and I do a lot of things, and I'm also at the same time aware of what I can't do. Um, so sometimes, like, if I do need help,
Yep.
reaching something in the grocery store, it's like, yeah, sure, I don't want to fall out of my chair trying to reach it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Then you're really a spectacle. Then you're really
right.
a spectacle. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
But
don't have, like, just a little bit back to Earl and service dog skills is, so Earl goes grocery shopping with me, and because he goes
awesome.
everywhere with me.
Hmm.
Because he's a service dog, he has rights of well, I have rights of public access with a service dog.
Hmm.
Um, and so, I go grocery shopping with him, but I tend not to. I mean, I have him pick stuff off the floor for me if I drop it, but I don't have them in general, like, get things off the shelf for me. Now, there's some
Okay.
service dog owners that do that, and I think it's perfectly fine. I don't, because I feel like people get kind of creeped out by it because they're like, oh, like, a
Hmm.
dog has got his paws on the on the shelf.
Right.
But, like, that's actually some of the things too that service dogs can do. So, like, while I'm not going to have him climb up the side of the freezer to get me my ice cream, I'll ask the woman that's 4'8" to make her day
Right.
instead. Um, like, he can grocery shop with me, and he can, like, turn lights on and off for me, and he
Hmm.
can press elevator buttons for me that I can't reach. Or, as we saw earlier before we started the interview, like, I'm sitting in my bed because that's my favorite place. It's
Hmm.
more comfortable in my wheelchair. Um, and the wind blew my door open, and Earl was sitting next to me. Instead of me having to transfer into my chair and go shut the door, I could just ask my dog to go shut the door, and he went and he just nudges the door with his nose and clasps the door, and and that saves me. Or when I get into bed and I forget to shut off the light, he can turn the lights on and off for me. So just with command, he's able to do that. So he
Wow.
can open the fridge and get something out of the fridge if it's in the same place at each time. So
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So if there's a bottle of water that's in the same spot, he can.
Yeah, so his school trains him for to put things in the you put things in the bottom left hand corner of your fridge.
Okay.
So it's great for people that maybe they're diabetic and they have their insulin, or they may be quadriplegic and spend a lot of their time or some of the time at least without a care. Like they can um they can have, their snack or their dinner or whatnot that may be in there, and they can just ask their dog to go and open the fridge and get out whatever is there that they want. Maybe it's a pre-made snack that's in a paper bag or whatnot, and bring it to them. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Wow. You just touched on something about you having the right to take your service dog into certain areas, and that I think that's another uh, area I want to say of like misconception, I guess, of
Mhm.
service animals versus like
Absolutely.
emotional support animals and
Yeah.
therapy and companion animals. You
Yeah.
see a lot of those stories in the news these days. I remember a couple years ago, someone was taking an emotional support peacock on an airplane. Um,
Lots
so there
of
was,
stories.
yeah, so there was, controversy or questions being asked if emotional support animals are the same as service animals. And can you get into that a little bit
I
of?
can, because I think it's really important. It's something that actually Earl and I do a lot of work around, whether it be policy work um, or just education work. So service dogs, which include dogs like Earl, which is like he helps me with my mobility, or guide dogs, or medical alert dogs. They have the person, so all of the privileges, if you will, all of the rights are attached to the person, not to the dog. So my
Mhm.
dog doesn't have the right to go into a store. I have the right to bring my dog into the store. My
Okay.
service dog. So basically, so service dogs have the right, public access rights, which means they can go into places where other dogs, pet dogs, would not be allowed to go. So those, that whether that be medical facilities, the library, to the theater, to the grocery store, any place the public can go, my dog can go. There are some exceptions to that rule. You think of churches and synagogues and mosques as being public places because the public goes there. They are actually exempt. So if I want to go to a friend's wedding at a church that's not, um, my own church, I would need to call ahead and make sure that that the church would allow him to come in. I've only been denied twice. Um, One was on religious grounds, where it was an actual dog issue, and then the other um, was around dog fur. And while having dog fur in your church um, is, it might not be a big deal for them. For me, it was a big deal for them, and they are protected
Hmm.
by law. So, I just didn't go. Um, Medical, you can't go into procedure rooms, so you can't bring your dog into the operating room, um, and you can't bring them onto burn units. And then there's some areas where there's infection control that you wouldn't want to bring your dog in anyway. So if somebody had coronavirus, for example, or COVID-19, you wouldn't want to necessarily bring that dog into that area in
Right.
general, because your dog, while he won't catch it, can be a vector potentially. I mean, it's very
Hmm.
low risk, but he could carry that on his fur or whatnot if he was, you know. So, yeah. So, emotional support animals. There's a huge amount of misunderstanding around them. They do not have public access rights. They cannot go anywhere that a pet cannot go. So if if a store says like no pets allowed, then an emotional support animal can't go in there. The
Hmm.
only rights that you have to have a emotional support animal is on some forms of transportation, and there are still rules around that, and it's changing rapidly. And I foresee that that's not going to be allowed as freely as it currently is in the near future. And then the other is to have your dog or your pet. It's emotional support animal is a pet, as opposed to specifically a dog. But is to have an emotional support animal in housing that does not normally allow pets. So, and even that, there's some caveats to that. So if you live in a private home, so you might have a duplex, or 3 apartments or 4 apartments in an apartment building, they can still deny you an emotional support animal
Oh,
under.
wow.
Yeah. So there are some restrictions to how many, if you're a landlord that lives on part, like there's all kinds of these rules around that, but there's a lot of abuse. Some of that abuse is deliberate. Some of that abuse is based in entitlement. Some of that is just a general ignorance of the law. Like in my use, I don't even mean that in the inflammatory way of saying ignorance, like in the true unaware,
Hmm.
uneducated in the subject term of just being ignorant of what the law is. And service dogs are highly, highly trained. So Earle was in school, most of them are 2 years at minimum, 18 months to 2 years. Guide dogs tend to be even longer. And emotional support animals don't have any requirement to be trained at all, none. So Earle has been attacked in public by both fraudulent service dogs, so people who have deliberately portrayed their pet dog as a service dog when they weren't. And he has also been bitten in the face by a person that brought their untrained emotional support animal into a hospital, actually. So
Oh, wow.
he's been bitten twice. He's actually been bitten 3 times, but one was by a pet, just was out in public. But yeah, he's been bitten twice in places where he should have been safe, because those dogs should not have been there because they were untrained. He has a little scar across his nose.
Oh.
Yeah, he's
Oh,
still here.
wow. Oh,
Yeah,
yes. But that, I think I appreciate that, that conversation, because it's, like I said, there have been things in the news in the last few years about emotional support animals, and people tend to think that, the terms are interchangeable: service animal
right.
and emotional support animal and dogs. And, um, when I knew there was a difference, but I think, I appreciate your explanation of it, very thorough explanation of it, to really get a better understanding of what the difference is and what is allowed, under those specific terms, and what they actually mean. And you, as a person who has a service dog, what you're entitled to and what your dog is able to do along with you, because you're allowed in to these places. Your service animal is allowed in the
Yeah,
places as well.
and I think it's important too to differentiate. Like, there's some people that that think that because they have a disability, just because they have a disability, that their dog is like their dog can have those same um, public access, have the same public access as, say, a dog that's been trained. And that's not the case. So just because you have a disability, it doesn't mean you can bring your dog to the grocery store.
Right.
So there's that aspect of it. There's also what tasks your dog is trained to do. So just because your dog makes you feel better doesn't mean that you can bring them into the grocery store. It doesn't count. So the Department of Justice is the organization that oversees kind of the laws around service dogs and guide dogs and emotional support animals. Actually, emotional support animals are covered under Department of Transportation, HHA, whatever that stands for, not even under ADA. So, so they kind of, the law was written fairly kind of broad, and while that was meant to be done with the best of intentions, it's created kind of the situation we're in now, where it's not, it leaves a lot open to interpretation. And it also, I mean, while it's very concise in some areas, I think businesses are left with kind of the burden of policing, and I think that that's kind of where the problem lies. That it's kind of, it works well for some people, but then businesses are left being like, is your dog a service dog, and then trying to determine that. And so a lot of times they just decide they don't want to address it, so then you end up with you know little dogs in grocery carts at Super Walmart that are barking like crazy. So yeah, inviting
Yes.
my dog in the
Yes.
face.
Right. Yeah. We all know. Yeah. We all have
Yeah,
seen those, like you said.
yeah. And there's places I don't go because of that. So I've decided there are places that have made a decision not to enforce those laws and those regulations. So then I just choose. I'm a firm believer in kind of like voting with your dollar. So I just don't frequent those places. So
Hmm. Yeah. Um, trying to think if there's anything else that I would like to talk about. Is there anything else you would like to talk about? More of your the other work that you do with uh with bringing the
Project Possible.
accessible, yeah, the project possible.
I would
And
actually, I would like to talk about really quickly is about service dogs and world travel.
yes, and before we get into that, did you say you hand cycled 2,000 miles? Is that what you
I
said?
did. I hand cycled 2,000 miles around the perimeter of Ireland
Wow.
last September and October. I did solo
Wow.
hand cycle. I was the first person to ever do it. So I did the perimeter of Ireland. It wasn't the hardest cycle that I ever did, ironically, like amazingly. It was hard. I did about 50 miles per day over the course of 5.5 weeks. Um, but
Wow.
the actual most difficult cycle I ever did was I hand cycled the Ring of Kerry in Ireland, and I did that in a 14-hour hand cycle, and it was the most. I do endurance hand cycling, so I do long distance, 100-mile century rides, that kind of thing. But the Ring of Kerry was probably the most difficult thing I ever did in my life. 14 hours
Wow.
on like incredible grades, and yeah, it was crazy. I was supposed to do it again this year, but COVID kind of
Yes,
put a stop to
yes.
that. So
Right.
yeah,
So you mentioned you wanted to talk about service dogs and international travel, you said?
yeah.
Yes.
So when I was a ski racer, a mono skier, I made the choice not to have a service dog just because of training and just the travel that you do and the hours that you keep, and it wasn't something that made a lot of sense. With service dogs, you need to make like lifestyle choices, and you have to remember that service dogs are kind of like toddlers, and they're a huge amount of responsibility, and while they're intelligent toddlers, they're still dogs. Like they're intelligent, but they still have to be watched. You can't, while you might be allowed to, for example, go to a major concert in the stadium, like you're legally allowed to bring your service dog into that environment. You have to just be the guardian of your dog and say, you know what, that's probably really not a good idea for my dog. My
Hmm.
dog wouldn't be happy doing that. I'm in Ireland. We go to a lot of pubs, um, where you have a lot of traditional music. Earl hates the banjo. Like he hates the
Oh,
banjo. I think it just hurts his ears. So like my partner plays the bagpipes and Earl doesn't mind that, but the banjo and
really?
sometimes the yeah, he doesn't like it. And he doesn't really like the accordion that much either, which is a traditional Irish, used in traditional music.
Yeah.
So initially, if I brought him to a pub, he'd be unhappy because it would hurt his ears. And so then it was like a decision, like, do I go to the pub or do I not go to the pub because I don't have somebody to watch my dog.
Hmm.
I ended up getting him ear protection, so he can go to the pub now, and he's perfectly happy. He likes to see people. um, but you have to make those decisions. So that's why I
Right.
decided initially not to have a service dog, because my lifestyle was not conducive to it. Then after I had to retire from ski racing and I got Earl, um, I figured that my life was going to be really community based. It was going to be kind of local.
Hmm.
Just like traveling around New England. I wasn't planning on traveling, you know, further afield, and certainly not solo traveling. But I got Earle, and it was my 10-year anniversary of my original first injury. And I decided to do a year of adventure because I had been a really big traveler prior to my injury. So I decided to do a year of adventure where I was going to be traveling internationally. And I did my first trip with my sister, Meg, because she's a really good Sherpa. And I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do it on my own. And like literally within 24 hours, I realized I didn't really need Meg. I love her. I like traveling with her, but she wasn't necessary. And she wasn't necessary because I had my dog. And because my dog could pretty much, like I figured out my luggage. I use actually this isn't a plug, but I just want to tell people. I was just telling
Hmm.
you, I use Phoenix Instinct luggage, which attaches to the back of my wheelchair, so I'm completely hands-free. So once I got Phoenix Instinct luggage, wheelchair luggage, and my dog, I was 100% like solo independent. And so I traveled back to Ireland. I traveled to Norway. I traveled to Spain. Um, traveled to London. So I was able to kind of like do that, and it was because my dog was there to kind of help, but he also was a confidence booster because while I may not use him necessarily for much other than picking things up, that's his main task for me. He, as we spoke of earlier, he makes people nicer to me,
Yeah.
and he allows people to kind of like be more helpful. So when I'm going through the airport, people get out of my way. Um, and he is seated in the airplane with me, and he like right at my feet, and he's just gives me the confidence to walk through Spain in areas that might be more questionable as a solo female traveler. For example, my dog is completely harmless. He does not have any prey drive, and he doesn't have any aggression. They're bred not to be, but
Hmm.
he's a really big dog. And so people will make the assumption that he would protect me. I don't know that he ever would protect me, but people have that assumption. So that's an okay assumption when you're traveling solo by yourself in places that might not be quite as safe as
Yeah.
your own. But yeah, so he allowed me to kind of get back into travel and kind of opened up the world to me again. So totally unintended consequence again of having a service dog.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. And I like to travel, so
Yeah.
I will take your plug of the luggage company and and check
Oh
them
my
out.
God. Like, okay. I don't want anybody to think this is I'm not remunerated for saying what I have to say. It is truly like I used to do like, and if you travel, this is going to be your life. You have
Hmm.
your wheelchair on the back of your backpack on the back of your wheelchair, and then
Hmm.
you have a bag on your lap. And then
Uh-huh.
you can't if you're solo traveling, you can't pack a lot because you have to be like carry it and be responsible for it because
Right.
I don't I I don't tend to rent cars when I travel. I usually just take public transportation. Um,
Hmm.
because getting hand controls and dealing with all of that and carrying it's just a pain. So so yeah, like that's what I used to do, and like you'd be going through the airport and like your bag falls off your lap, and then you have all these people around thinking that you are like incompetent and like unable to function on your own. Um, and then I don't know if you have this problem. I'll speak freely. Um, it's like you have the weight on the back of your chair. So you go into the bathroom, and if you're going to transfer onto a toilet, that now
Right.
means that you've got the weight on your chair. So you're going to take off your backpack and the bag on your lap and put them on the filthy bathroom floor, and then
Right.
or you're going to have your wheelchair tip over.
Right.
Or you're going up wheelchair ramps and like in the airport, and there's too much weight on the back, so like you're trying
Right.
to lean forward to not
To
tip
not
over, but you
tip.
can't because you have a bag on your lap. Like it's
Yeah.
heinous. It's terrible. So I found a few years ago this company in the UK called Phoenix Instinct, and they make this amazing luggage that attaches to the back of your wheelchair and
Wow.
onto a bar, and it's completely self-holding, so it doesn't tip your wheelchair, and it has like these
Oh.
multi-directional wheels. So like you can still wheelie on and off curbs, and you can spin around. And what I love about it is that now when I walk, or I don't walk anywhere, but well, I mean, when I
Hmm.
wheel in to the airport, people don't look at me like I'm not swarmed by people asking me if I need help. They automatically are like, she knows what she's doing.
Yeah.
And so, like, if I need help, I can ask for help, but people aren't like doing that thing, that thing that people do where
Yes.
they're just like, and you're not treated like a child, or you just kind of go in and you feel good.
Hmm.
I love it. I can get on and off buses like without them putting the ramp down. It's the best thing. It is
Wow.
that and my freewheel. Do you have a freewheel?
I don't.
Oh my
I've,
gosh, you need a freewheel.
I
Then you can go to the
do.
beaches in Long Island.
Look, I do. I do need a
You
freewheel.
need, you need a freewheel, man.
We're going to give a shout out to the freewheel people. I've seen them and they are fantastic.
They're crazy expensive. Like
They are.
when you look at the cost of them, and I did pay for mine, so again, I don't get any benefit from this. I'm just like sharing this with the world. Um, I've had, I had one for like probably 10 or 12 years. Like I had them when they first came out. And it lasted me really well when I was a ski racer. But you look at the price and you're just like, oh my God, like that's a lot of money for like that little freewheel. Changed my life. Like it
Yeah.
made everything accessible to me. So I can go down the beach without too much problem, as long as you can. Like if you're on a sandy beach, like you have to have some upper body strength in general to wheel on a sandy beach.
Right.
But that I can wheel on rock beaches. I can like I can hike in mountains with it. I can hill walk. Like it's awesome. So the freewheel is truly. I had a young student. He actually put my freewheel together when he was like 9 years old because I couldn't freaking figure out how to do it.
Oh, wow.
And this kid, this kid was like, I was an elementary school teacher, and he was like, I'll do it. And I was like, okay, here are the parts. I don't know what I'm doing, but it takes a little bit of finagling to work. And he put together. He like to this day he's like graduated from college, and he still calls it my wheel of freedom instead of calling it my free wheel. He's
The
like, your wheel
freewheel.
of freedom.
That's funny.
He's like, yeah. He's like, do you have your wheel of
Wow.
freedom? I'm like, I do.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Yeah.
So the last question I had, which I like to ask all of my guests, is what do you want the world to know about people who live with disabilities?
I would say that when people with disabilities are not included in every aspect of life, when opportunities aren't there to even the playing field and provide access, um, to access to jobs, access to healthcare, equal access, that what is being lost is human potential. And when human potential is lost, then um, then society loses out, and people lose out. So that individual loses out, and there is value and gifts in everybody. And sometimes they're hard to see, and whether that's hard to see because people don't have the opportunity to meet people with disabilities, and you don't know, or sometimes they're hard to see because people in general can have personalities that make it harder for you, disability or not, that can make it harder to get to know people or whatnot. But I think that's, I think that opportunity only increases the benefits for society. Like it's not about, it's good for everybody. Like what did Eleanor Roosevelt say? When it gets better for, I don't know, when it gets better for everybody, it's better for everybody. So when
Hmm.
everybody, you kind of raise everybody up, I guess. I don't
Yeah.
know. There's probably better quotes, but you know, I don't know.
But that's
Flood. What is it? A flood tide raises all boats. I don't know. I don't know. But like this, I'm sure we can find something. I'll get back.
I think I think you definitely said what is so true. Everyone has gifts. Everyone, everyone has something to add um to things. And I think the more that people with disabilities are involved in things, I think that's when we can start to see even more changes in a lot of things. Um,
Yeah.
where we're not, and it's a lot of little things that couldn't be done, and it's just like, did they ever consider, making, just because the ADA says a doorway has to be a certain number of inches wide or a ramp has to be, at a certain slope. Did they ever think that, as you said, somebody who's traveling with a backpack on a ramp might, tip over because it's a little steep?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but it meets the ADA requirement. So it's like, they don't really, worry about it too much, but it's just,
Or like when they make ramps so that in order to get on them, you have to wheel uphill. And
yes,
then it's like bringing you in the opposite direction, like the door's over here, but yeah, like there's no thought kind of to where things go, just that they comply. What I think
right.
is interesting is in Ireland, they have standards for accessibility, but they have no actual. I mean, they have regulations around like what, like you have to have a ramp, but they don't give like the standards of what that ramp is. So
Oh,
like in America, it's 1 foot for every inch of elevation.
right.
In Ireland, they're just like, you have to have a ramp. That ramp might be as steep as having a freaking step.
Yeah.
Like there's no, and then they'll be like, well, there's a ramp,
Hmm.
and it's like, well, yeah, but you can't use it because it's at a 42% grade and it's only a foot long. you
Right.
know.
Right.
I think, can I add one more thing that I think is really important, that as I
Yes.
live my life in the disabled world and then live my life around the world, that I'm really starting to see and believe. And it comes from a little girl here in Ireland. Her name is Molly Marshall, and she's a 9-year-old triathlete with cerebral palsy. She's Ireland's youngest triathlete, and she always says, if if you say, like, Molly, why are you a triathlete, and she'll say, because like maybe somebody will see me, and they'll know that maybe they can be a triathlete too. And
Hmm.
I think there's a huge strength in representation. And so the more people see people with disabilities out and doing things, and um whether that be grocery shopping like we spoke of earlier, or whether that be surfing, like it just makes people more aware. So the reason why I went to a cycling race recently in Ireland, and I was cycling with the elite riders. I was starting with the elite riders, and there was a couple of them that literally looked at me, turned to the guys next to them and said, why is she cycling with us? But not nicely, I need to add.
Wow.
Not nicely. um because they didn't recognize me as an athlete. They recognized me as a person with a disability, with all of the stigma and their own preconceived ideas of what a person with a disability is. And that's
Hmm.
because you don't see a lot of people in this country out doing sports. There are some, but it's not a commonality like it is in the United States.
Right.
um, and it hurt me. Like most things don't hurt me, I can brush them off. But like somehow, for some reason, I think probably because I was an elite level athlete, I was just like it was like, and then I was like, what am I doing here? Like, why am I here? And then
Wow.
I did my race, and I did it well. And at the end, those same people were literally cheering me up this crazy, ridiculous hill. And then I saw them during my Ring of Kerry cycle, and and now they have an understanding that because I'm a wheelchair user, like they can't define me.
Right.
Like I define me, and they have to accept my definition of myself. And then that shifts um, shifts their belief system. And they're going to be more likely in the future to be the people that say, yeah, when we do this race, we do need to make sure that there's an accessible bathroom, because we will have athletes that that are wheelchair users or that have a disability. And
Right.
and it opens up that field for the future. It opens it up for Molly, so that when Molly is racing, she's not the only disabled person in the country doing triathlons, you know?
Right. Yeah. It is. It's
Sense
very
is a kind of,
important. No, that's very
representation
important for
matters.
that. It does. Representation does matter for sure. It's so important to to see people who look like us and people who even don't look like us with other disabilities doing things. And
Yeah.
like you said, not letting society define who we are, I think is a big
Hmm.
thing. I define who I am and you define who you are, and we can, we'll do what we want to do. And if we can't do
Yeah.
it, we'll let you
Yeah.
know. I have
Yeah.
really good
Yeah.
friends that it's not sport related, but a few years ago, one of my really good friends, my best friend from high school, her daughter invited me to go see the Nutcracker uh, show with them locally here in New Jersey. And they had steps. It was an old theater. I knew that, but I wasn't sure what their step situation looked like, because some
Yeah.
steps I can get up and some steps not so much. um, and the usher at the place, she saw me walking with my crutches and she said, "Oh, there's no way you can get up those steps." And
It's like the kids.
before
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
before I could say something, my friend said something. And I was like, "Okay, like it's okay." Like, and she's like, "No, it's not okay. Like, she doesn't get to tell you what you can't do." She said,
Yeah.
"You could probably get up those steps better than her."
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, like I probably could, but like today I really don't feel like getting up those small steps. So like, if they
Yeah.
can reseat us somewhere, that'd be great. Um, but like let me make that decision. Don't
Right.
tell me,
What you
especially
can
as
and
an
can't do.
employee there, don't say,
Yeah.
"Oh," and she was really just so firm with it. "Oh, you can't get up those steps. There's no way you can get up those steps." I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh, well, not like I could, but I don't feel
I
like it
think
right now." But
I think the other thing that that as I've lived in my world, as a person with a disability, I used to be self-conscious, and I'm so not self-conscious anymore, because I
Mhm,
realized that if I'm self-conscious, then I lose out. So like, I was in Norway, and in order to get to the view, to like the this amazing view over Bergen, Norway, um, I had to go down a set of these steps, and I could do that in my chair going backwards, but to go up, I would have to get out of my chair and go up the chairs on my butt. I would go up the stairs on my butt,
mhm,
and I like sat at the top, like at the top of these steps, and I was like, there are people from all over the world, and not everybody has the same view on disability as among around the world. And so I'm like, I'm gonna like end up crawling essentially up these steps, and everybody is going to be staring at me, and they're going to have pity for me, and I hate that. And then I was like, I am not missing out on the opportunity to see this, based on based on like what other people, that I'm going to make other people uncomfortable,
right.
because they're going to feel uncomfortable, and they're going to feel pity for me. And then I'm like screw it, like, and I no longer take into consideration other people's discomfort when it comes to big things,
Right.
things that are important, things that I'll miss out on.
Yep. Yeah. That's
So
so true. Yeah,
yeah.
you really and it takes time, like, to get through that and to, "Oh, okay, I just won't do it. It's no big deal. It's okay." And then you get to a
Yeah.
point, like you said, you're like, "No, there's no way in the world I'm I'm here now and I'm not going to miss
Yeah.
this. I'll do whatever I have to do to get there."
It was funny, because on that same day, I took the funiculator up, which is kind of like a crazy cog railway train thing. So I take the funiculator up, and I lost my ticket, and to get on to go back down. And Norway's an
Oh.
incredibly expensive it's an incredibly expensive country, and I travel on a pittance of a budget. And so I had climbed down climb down the stairs and climb back up again. And then I lost my ticket to get onto the funiculator to go down. And the ticket man says to me, "Well, you can't get on without a ticket." He's like, "The only other option is to hike down on the path," which was a 5 kilometer hike, or a 5 mile hike down this wilderness path, like on this mountain.
What?
And then he's like, "I saw you scramble up the stairs, like you'll be totally fine." And then he was like, "Ha, I'm just kidding. You can ride the funiculator without buying another ticket." Um,
Oh,
and then I was like, "Well," I was like, "Oh, but like, do you think I really can get down the path?" I wheelied 5 miles down the freaking mountain path with my dog. He was
that's
like
fantastic.
horrified. Like he was horrified. He was horrified. He was like, "No, no, ma'am, you can get on." I'm like, "No, like I'm taking that path."
You don't
And I
threaten
did.
me with a
People
good
were like
time.
standing on the bike path, being like, "Who is this girl? Like, what is she doing?" It was the best. It was like one of my best Norway experiences because I was just
That's
like, "No, oh, okay, well, I'm doing that." I'm sure he was like, "I'm gonna get fired."
right.
Like, "No, I'm taking the path."
Wow. But see, and that's the kind of thing. It's just like, wow, like, okay, yeah, if I can take it, I'll do it. It's not a problem. It's
Yeah,
an adventure. You're there, you're there for the experience of it all. So it's like, why not
exactly.
do it?
Yeah, yeah.
I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with you. It was so
We have
much
to meet
fun.
in Rhode Island. We
We
have to meet on
do.
Rhode
We do for sure.
or
I'm definitely down for it. Like once everything clears
You
up
should
with
just come to Oh my gosh, you should just come to Ireland.
I should. You're right. I'm down for it.
Airfares are really cheap right now.
I'm I'm down for it. I've
They
never
keep
been,
canceling my flight. They keep canceling my flight home. It's awesome. I may be able to stay here.
but we will definitely talk again and discuss more topics and what you're doing and just to keep up all the good work. It's really impressive. I think that people like you are in doing things like that. Um,
Yeah, well, we
so
kind of have to because
we do.
Molly Marshall is depending on us.
That's right.
Little
That's
Molly
right.
Marshall is depending on us to be visible so that she can, you know. So
Yeah.
yeah, representation matters.
And thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation, and we will be in touch.
All right, take care.
All right, you too. Have a good night. Thanks. Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Our View podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the Our View podcast on Anchor, Apple Podcast, or Spotify. New episodes will be released on the 15th and 30th of every month. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at Our View for Life. That's OurView, the number 4, LIFE. Do you want to help change the tone of conversation among your family and friends? Head over to our website for some Our View merchandise. Our website is www.our-view.com/merchandise. I thank you for listening. Have a great day and take care.